Welcome to the Sheffield As Bill Sees It meeting. This is a main share meeting, and today it is with great pleasure and much gratitude that we welcome Tarek from Alabama, who's come to share for around 40 minutes, after which we'll open up for general sharing or if you'd like to ask a question. Tarek, it's wonderful to have you here, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Oof. I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. My name's Tarek. It's good to be with you this morning for me. It is, I want to say thank you to Young for extending this invitation. I enjoy seeing him in all the groups that he's a part of that I've been able to participate in. It is an honor and a blessing. A power greater than myself separated me from alcohol and a host of other substances on the morning of November 5th in 2007 because of a merciful God, a loving God, the program and fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, and a group of people that I have in my life that I have given spiritual consent to that have been able to have conversations with me about my behavior and how I show up. The assumption there that I'm opening the hood of the car and letting them look underneath the hood. So there is a requirement of intimate self-disclosure that has everything to do with what we're going to talk about this morning. Because of all of those things, I have a debt to pay. And I know we talk about grace a lot, this undeserved assistance bestowed upon a human being by some level of divine intervention. I like to talk about mercy, which is my favorite definition, is the compassionate treatment of a human being in distress. And because of all those things, I have found it unnecessary to use alcohol or any mood-altering or mind-altering substance to treat any degree of psychological pain that I'm experiencing. And I will tell you, the majority of my psychological pain today is based around this idea that we're going to talk about of practicing these principles in all our affairs and the struggles that we all have with this. When Young asked me to pick out a reading, it'd been a few years since I'd gone through the As Bill Sees It, so it was nice to go back and look at the different readings that I'd highlighted over the years, and this one just jumped out at me. And I think it jumped out at me because I am going through this book of all Bill's grapevine articles and letters. It's the language of the heart. There's another letter I want to read a little excerpt from it from 1961. It's on page 321 in the Shape of Things to Come. It's just a couple of paragraphs if you guys would indulge me for a few minutes. Yet how many of us, for example, would presume to declare, well, I'm sober, I'm happy, what more can I want? What more can I do? I'm fine just the way I am. We know that the price of such self-satisfaction is an inevitable backslide, punctuated at some point by a very rude awakening. We have to grow, or else we begin to deteriorate. For us, the status quo can only be for today, never for tomorrow. Change we must. We cannot stand still. So then, if our basics are so firmly fixed as all this, what is there left to change or to improve? The answer will immediately occur to us. While we need not alter all truths, we can surely improve their application to ourselves, to our community, to our families, to our business places, to AA as a whole, and to the relation with the world around us. We can constantly step up the practice of these principles in all our affairs. As we now enter upon this great phase of our AA life, let us therefore rededicate ourselves to an even greater responsibility for our general welfare. Let us continue to take our inventory as a fellowship, searching out our flaws and confessing them freely. Let us devote ourselves to the repair of faulty relations that may exist, whether within or without. Let us continue our inventory. I mean, this is a great deal of what life is about today. It's interesting, the topic here I have for the next 36 minutes or so is practicing these principles in all our affairs. And it thrusts us into the question of the living problem that we're confronted with. It's always interesting when I give a talk. You got all these wonderful ideas about where you want to take the talk. Then the talk starts, and it doesn't go to any of those ideas. It starts to be inspired and moves in its own direction afterwards. And I was thinking, I am going to remember this. I woke up early. I've been up for a few hours, and one of the things that came to me as my eyes were opening was the connection between relationships and what we're going to talk about, the practice of these principles. But first, we have to define what the principle is. And for me, as I give this talk today, I have a backdrop of a definition or a meaning I've ascribed to this word, principle, which is a code or value or ideal that I try to live by. And, I love the concept that Sandy Beach talks about, that it's spiritual progress towards spiritual perfection, with an understanding that I will never achieve this perfection. But if I shoot for it, wherever I land is going to be really good. But if I shoot for mediocrity, the place I land will not be any place that I need to brag about or talk about, or it's just not going to be a good place. I will not be effective. And our goal here is to grow, in my opinion, in understanding being more effective in the spiritual realm. And then we have to live in this thing around us called the world, culture, our society, and how can I be effective there? So we have to talk about relationships. But if you're going to talk about relationships, the discussion is really about character building. And in order to have a discussion about character building, we have to have a discussion about self-examination. And that's why that word inventory jumped out at me when I was reading the excerpt from Language of the Heart. It's such an interesting concept that I hear, that these principles we practice them in the fellowship, but they're measured at home and at work, where we spend the majority of our time. And the paradox is that if I don't spend a lot of time practicing these principles in the fellowship and participating in the program and the fellowship and having the desire to sacrifice my personal time to help other people learn how to live this way of life, and to sacrifice the time on the phone, and to do the things that I do on the weekends, and to the time I spend with my sponsor on the phone talking, our weekly meeting, all of those things are taking away from my family. And so it's interesting now, coming up on my 18th, the completion of my 18th year in this way of life, I start to look back, because I now have got experience under my belt. And I mean, that at the end of the day, I remember being new, and I would always tell people it was about quality, not quantity. And as my sponsor loves to point out, the people that usually say that don't have much time, but time creates experience. And experience is what I think ultimately changes our stories. Because we look back, my grand sponsor, he's the first one I think I heard say this, but, life is lived going forward, but it's only understood in the rear view. And so as I look back over a failed marriage, I want to give some examples of some of these, like these lived principles. So, if anything I put in front of my recovery, I'm going to lose, right? And the paradox is finding this thing. There's no such thing as balance. What's interesting is we talk about we can't manage our lives, but yet we're going to try to balance our lives. That you can't. It just doesn't work for me. I don't think the thing balance exists. But back in my marriage, that was the struggle. And when we talk about a more important demonstration lies ahead in our respective homes, occupations, and affairs, I wasn't doing that. I was married to a woman that was not in the program, that did not need this way of life. And I wore my recovery and my participation in Alcoholics Anonymous as a badge of courage. And I used it as a weapon, to hit her over the head with, because I need to do these things in order to have a home and have a job and be able to provide. But it was done from I'm a big deal. right? That's the perspective it took. My friend Brandon talks about this all the time. Like, I was coming at my family from I'm such a big deal doing all these things. These guys are going to die if I'm not out there trying to help them, man. My home group will just fall apart if I'm not there on a regular basis. All these things I would say to myself to justify the fact that I was absent a great deal of time. I did not learn a way to make her feel important. I definitely wasn't checking near the last year and a half, probably, are your emotional needs being met? And so I missed the boat. I could sit there and talk to a sponsee about how these principles have to be demonstrated at home first, at work, but I wasn't practicing what I preach. And these are principles today. It's interesting how the relationship we have with our sponsees, I hope you are oriented this way. If you find yourself giving them a piece of advice or suggestion or sharing an experience with them, that there is this thing inside of you that sometimes gets pushed. Maybe it's gone off course and it gets back on course because I'm not doing these things. I don't want to be that guy. I have a desire to do all the things I'm asking the guys that I help to do. And so what hit me was, a couple of years ago, I was reading something and I can't remember, and it said the most important work that you do is within the walls of your own home. And so that's a principle for me today. It has to be a primary principle, or my recovery means very little. Because what happened to me prior was that I cared more about a room full of strangers. Like today, I see a lot of familiar faces on this call. Most of you I don't know. We belong to this cosmic family called Alcoholics Anonymous, so we know each other on one level. But it was more important that all of you respect me, and I don't even know you. Where was the respect for my family? So now it's the principle that I try to live by today. It's more important for those that know me the best to respect me the most. And that starts with my family. That starts with my colleagues at work. And then it comes down to my sponsees and the people that see me on a regular basis at my home group and the other extended family in Alcoholics Anonymous. I had it backwards. And I think it's only experience in my situation that has allowed me now to see that. And so that is tied, I believe, to this idea of my instincts, right? My instinct for survival, right? Because I had been set free by grace and mercy. I had been delivered to a state of being that was embodied with willingness and a readiness. I heard a sponsor sister of mine talk about this the other night. She talked about that space between willingness and being ready and how they have to come together. It's like they're occurring at the same time. But now, after the failed experience in that marriage of not truly practicing the principles of, demonstrating this way of life, the importance of making your family members feel like they're a part of your life. Like recovery, Alcoholics Anonymous, my program, my fellowship, it's not separate from my life today. It's not compartmentalized. And because of that, I can see now that the most important work I do is within the four walls of my home. These two boys that look at me, like they're my stepsons. One of them is 10 years old and his father is struggling with this illness. The other one's father was taken from this plane of existence by this illness a year and a half ago. For all intents and purposes, I'm the only father figure they have. The most important work I do has to be there and has to be with their mother. Now, the paradox is I got to do this work with all of you too, or I won't be effective. So, it's back and forth. But I think in acknowledging the back and forth struggle, I am less likely to fall asleep to it not being there. I'm going to give you guys an example, and I'm going to hope this doesn't drift into like an outside issue, because I was talking to my sponsor earlier in the week. We had this event take place in the United States this past week where an individual lost his life, and my my stepson's mother shared something he said, which contradicts my views. Okay. And so now we're talking about, one of the principles, the self-defeating principles that I had for many years is I have to be right. I have to be right, and you have to see my way. And so I'm talking, I'm praying. I've been taught very well. Prayers start inside of me, and I'm praying. And I talk to my sponsor almost every Thursday, and I'm so glad that I am built that way, to see the value in the wisdom that's given to me through his 30, 38, 39 years of experience. And we're talking, and he asked me the question. He's like, are you going to be able to convince a 14-year-old that he's not right? I remember what I was like at 14 years old. I had the answer to every problem in the world. There was nothing I knew that was not worth knowing, and I knew I was right in every situation. So me coming at him, trying to insert that self-defeating principle, I need you to see it my way, wasn't the right way to go at it. But what do we do here? Our literature says we are broad, roomy, all-inclusive, never exclusive or forbidding. That is a principle. Doesn't matter if we're just talking about Alcoholics Anonymous. That's a principle for life. And Ralph took me through and just asked me a series of questions. And through that series of questions, I could pose those same questions to my son. Let him draw his own conclusions. And without sponsorship, without the intimate self-disclosure on my part, giving him full access to my life and my struggle, because there's a part of me that wants my son to see it a specific way. Isn't that one of our major self-defeating principles? That we abandon relationships sometimes if people don't think the way we do. And that is not a productive, it can't be a part of a spiritual basis of life, I don't think. And so I had this conversation, and what came to me, man, one of my greatest heroes in Alcoholics Anonymous is a man named Don Fritz, who passed away, I think in 2005. And he used to have this principle, right? If I remember it correctly, it said confrontation, which is what I was about to have with my 14-year-old, without love is very cruel. And so I had to preface it, based on my conversation with my sponsor. I knew I had to set it up going in that I don't care what you believe. I will always love you. And as a result of that, the second part of the principle, which let me take that back. The truth delivered without love is cruel. Confrontation without a solution is brutal. That principle there was ringing. I was sitting on the edge of his bed. This was on Friday when he gets home from school, and I was having this conversation with him, and that's what was coming to me. I could hear my sponsor's voice here. I hear Don P over here, and I have to live this principle, okay? In my way of looking at things, when I'm hearing these voices, right, not auditory hallucinations, this is the spirit at work. This is the inspiration. This is why we have these conversations. This is why we say that God talks through other people. And so I was being inspired to live the principle of delivering the truth without compassion is a cruel thing to do to another human being. And with confronting him, I had a solution, right, to dialogue. I need to make him aware that he can talk to me about anything. This is a principle that I am just now being exposed to, that I'm waking up to after 18 years, almost 18 years of active participation in this way of life. It's taken the majority of that for me to get to this place where I see the value in these things. And then seeing the value in failure in the past is what has led me to success today. I look at, I used to own a business, and it was in the recovery field. And it was a 12-step immersion program, and I had an ideology. right? Ideology will destroy us. We call that attachments to belief systems, to value system, whatever it is. So I open up this program and I run it a certain way. And in running it based on my ideology, it puts me in constant collision with people that work in this industry because of my beliefs around it. And I don't want to drag in the beliefs because I think that would venture into violating, like for me, the 10th tradition, because I just was not cooperating. I'm reading Language of the Heart, and Bill constantly is telling us we must cooperate with these outside agencies. Our job, our responsibility is to never condemn. But what does Tarek do? I condemn anything that I don't think is the truth, the light, and the way. I condemn it. That's not a grounded, spiritually active person that has to do that, you know? The most, I think if we boil down our way of life to two words that would embody everything that we want to get to at some point in our spiritual awakening, is to let go. To let go. And for a very long time, I'm unable to let go. So I've got this business and I want everybody to know how they're doing it wrong. All right. But this story will show you how our failures are sometimes being used without our awareness. It's almost like the seventh step where I ask God to remove the defects that stand in my way of being useful to him. And I get convinced sometimes that I know how to, like, what it's going to look like for me to be useful, but I don't. And so my core ideology destroyed my business. The business failed. I lost investors' money. What am I going to do? I'm a failure. You know, I'm a pillar, quote unquote, in the recovery community. What is everybody going to think? My marriage fails at around the same time, you know, and I'm sitting there and I'm wondering to myself, God, why did you do this to me? I become indignant. And you fast forward 6 years, I believe. I'm sitting in a wedding. All right. I'm sitting at a wedding. I'm in the audience at the wedding. And I look up and the bride's walking down the aisle and she's walking and being delivered by her father, who was the man who I lost, the investor, lost all his money. He was delivering her to a young man that was a client that came through my program. Two of his groomsmen were clients that came through my program. And they would never have met their wives had they not been in my program in that city at that time. And what hit me, and I mean, it was the loudest thunder inside of me, the thunder, the lightning that I became aware was, oh my God, me suffering under the inability to let go of my self-defeating principles around my ideologies and having to be right and knowing the right way. And I have all the answers. If you're doing it differently, you must be doing it wrong. All that stuff crashed. And I realized that the orchestrator, God, in his magnificent tapestry, and I'm this little thread, right? My little program was a thread in that tapestry. And that was there for all those individuals to come together. Perhaps this is a way this is, I think, what happens when we're able to look at life through spiritual eyes, as to opposed to like my selfish, self-centered eyes, where I'm the big deal. And that's not it had nothing to do with me. I was an instrument being used. But it took that experience. So we talk about practicing these principles in all our affairs, but sometimes the spiritual experiences are tied to our inability to practice principles in all our affairs. We can't just look at it from one side. It has to be this aggregate of all of it. I'm moved to tell another story. This one has to do with my father and the principle of forgiveness. And so I grew up in an alcoholic home. Anybody on this call that knows that experience, it's not pleasant. It's the exact opposite. You hear adults screaming at each other in the middle of the night. You hear flesh hitting flesh in the middle of the night. You hear things breaking in the middle of the night. Dad comes home. He's in a good mood. He goes into his bedroom. He comes out a few hours later and he's been transformed. And now he's violent. He's verbally abusive. And my mom doesn't know what to do. And she's constantly abandoning her boys to leave and get some breath. She's slapping her face, pulling her hair. The boys are just like, what's wrong? Why does our mom continue to leave? And we know alcohol has something to do with it after we get a little bit older. But then as we get older, we get into positions where he's being violent with my mother, and I and my brother are forced to be physical with him. And then eventually that leads me to around age, I can't remember if it was my senior year in high school or when I came back after my first year of university, where I spit in my dad's face and I told him he didn't exist anymore. Okay. So it would be 14 years later before I would re-engage my relationship with my father. And there was no forgiveness in me around all of that. And my brother was put in I went off to university. My brother had to stay at home, and he had many more violent interactions with my father than I ever did. And so there was a lot of evidence that said he didn't deserve my forgiveness. And so I get sober. I'm doing that fifth step the first time. I've got those 16, 17 resentments against my father. And it's, have you abandoned people you love? Have you forgotten birthdays? Have you not shown up to an event where you swore you were going to be there? Have you been physically abusive with someone you love? Have you been an embarrassment to your family? These are the resentments I had towards my father, and I had perpetrated. My hypocrisy was exposed at an all-time high level, and I knew I had become my father on some level. And so compassion was born first, and then the ability to consider forgiveness, And I make amends with this man. It was in my first 6 months that I made amends to my dad. My parents were divorced finally. He was drinking himself to death in this little 1-bedroom condo, and I go see him. And I asked, I laid out all the harms. I had not been a good son. I never had the right to be physically violent with my own father. What was really important, I acknowledged to my father that I knew nothing about him before my father, he was 42 years old when I was born, 41 or 42. He was older. And so I knew nothing about what he went through in those first 42 years that shaped him into the man that he is, And so I had this conversation with him. I asked him what I could do to make it right. He said, I want you to be happy, and I want you to spend time with me. And I remember that my toes curled in my shoes when he asked me that, because I did not know if I would be willing to do that. But sometimes we're in a state of forgiveness. Like we do the actions of forgiving a person before we have forgiven the person. And as a result of that, we become to live the forgiveness. We set ourselves free. We set the other person free. And this is a principle that I hope everyone on this call experiences at some point. True forgiveness. And sometimes it takes taking the actions without knowing if it's really there. And so I was able to build a relationship with my father. I was able to take care of him. We started dating each other. I fell in love with him because I understood him at a deeper level. And now, it's funny. The anniversary of his passing was a few months ago. And before he passed away, he sat me down and I audio recorded like his life story, and my ancestors, like how they traveled across Europe and became like how my heritage is Middle Eastern and I have red hair and where all that comes from. That was in a conversation, and I sat and I listened to it. I still have his voice there, and that is a principle that has contributed so much in how I attempt to practice this relationship with my higher power, because I see the regenerative power of God. And so, I I know I read the St. Francis prayer in early sobriety. I used to have this bookmark that had the St. Francis prayer, then the questions from page 86, and that was like how I did my 11th step. But it's only been since having my new sponsor for the last 8 years, and the 12 and 12 becoming more important, with the new pair of glasses becoming more important, and just dialogue like, Tarek, get off the paper. Because look, I mean, I'm a student. That's how I'm built. I love to read spiritual literature. I love to study spiritual literature. I love to dialogue about spiritual literature, and I love to implement the practices into my life. Practice, practice, practice. If I'm lazy and I don't practice, I've lost for the day. But if I practice and I don't care what the results are, the practice, I win. I win in those days. And the St. Francis prayer, for years, I thought if it said, God, make me an instrument of your peace. And I always thought if I cleared away the channel, right? My friend Charlie used to talk about the PVC pipe, and I needed to always have enough broken out of the PVC pipe where there was some light shining through. And the image is that God's on one side, I'm on the other. And I always thought I was doing all this work to clear away the channel, to create space within myself. So when the troubles come and I can take the master's hand and I can walk up that mountain from the valley. And I thought all these things were going to come flying into me. Forgiveness, love, joy, understanding, comfort. All of those things are going to come to me if I had an open channel, if I was a hollow bone. And what I realized today, after deep discussions with my sponsor on a regular basis, is that I do this work and become this channel so those attributes are God's attributes. And if I do the work, they can come out of me into other people's lives. One of my favorite prayers that I work with every day, almost every day, is, God, fill me with your loving spirit, have it flow through me into the lives of others. And it's just totally changed what being an instrument is. A couple more things I want to talk about. I've been playing poker here over the last like 6 or 7 months. We have a monthly poker tournament that we play. And at the beginning of playing poker, it was all about knowing how to play the best hands, right? What do you do when the board texture says this? And what do you do when you're observing other players, and what are their tendencies? And, why can't I get good cards to play? Getting down on yourself when the good cards aren't there. So I'm always wanting to play the best hand possible. And so what hit me here recently was being a good poker player has everything to do with playing the bad hands. And so this life that we live, I think has more to do with how we show up when we play the bad hands that we're dealt. And this hit me this morning. This is one of the things I circled back to it. This morning I was thinking, because I've been playing a lot of poker, and I'm seeing the necessity in learning how to play the bad hands. And immediately I was drawn back to a conversation we had on our sponsorship family call Thursday night. And we were talking about, we were going through Chuck C's new pair of glasses, and we're reading this part about the big hurt. And when I shared about the big hurt, because Chuck says if we do the actions in Alcoholics Anonymous, we're going to be comfortable. And if we don't do the actions in Alcoholics Anonymous, we're going to get to a place where we experience the discomfort. And if that lingers for too long, we're probably going to drink, right? And the big hurt in Chuck C's book is capitalized, just like Bill Wilson capitalizes certain things in Alcoholics Anonymous in our book that indicate some type of higher power. And as we're reading this book, and I shared on the call, and I was talking about, all the valleys that I've experienced in my 18 years, with some of the darkest periods of my life, much darker than my struggle with alcohol and the other substances. And it was in those areas, those big hurts, that actually deepened my relationship with my higher power. And so, one of the things I love about my sponsors, I don't think he's very impressed with me, right? And And so it's easy, not easy. It was a difficult phone call the next day because I called him. I wanted him to take me deeper into his perspective around it. And because what he said on Thursday night was one of the most profound things I've heard in my 18 years. Because when I was reading New Pair of Glasses, the big hurt didn't come across. It came across circumstantial. It came across I'm getting dealt the bad cards, which are important. And that is where a lot of the meaning in our life comes from. It's where we really find out where we stand on the God idea. But the thing Ralph said, the big hurt is not my dad dying. The big hurt is not my sponsees who have died. The big hurt is not the lost business or the lost marriage or the health problems. The big hurt is not being tethered to God, is forgetting God, that perhaps those circumstantial things are the grace. Perhaps they're the mercy. And so I let go of an old idea. And this is probably the last principle I want to talk about. A couple of things. How do I want to? This idea of, it's almost when the big book talks about there's a price that we have to pay. It's called the destruction of self-centeredness. And everything in letting go to me has to do with that. Because when I am under a lot of stress, it's because I'm going through something that I think I'm a big deal or it's a big deal, and it's really not a big deal. As Don M used to talk about this, Don Majors, if it's not about God and it's not about the steps, then you're stuck in self because you're making a big deal out of something that doesn't matter. And I've always remembered that. Like it's one of those things. Like I don't know where I got this thing from. I hear a speaker, I hear a man have a conversation with me. He says something, and it gets planted. It's planted in me, right? And then I begin to work with it, and I begin to have the conversations about it, and then I have an experience with it. And this idea of letting go, Sandy Beach says it best. He gives you those examples of the old ideas that are, anytime I know I'm wrong and I acknowledge being wrong, I have let go of an old idea. And I hope one day I can get to that place where my life is I sit in God's will. God's wills, if you ask me what's God's will, everything that's happened in my life up to this point has been God's will. What happens is I'm walking through life. I forget about the principles I'm trying to practice because my ego's fixated about an aspect, a story, a circumstance, an event, something is supposed to happen. Ego says it's got to happen this way. I have no room to remember the presence of God in those situations. And as reality, with the great reality, capital G, capital R, presents itself to me, and I scream no, right? Letting go is about saying yes, regardless to what it is. The fact that this past summer has been busy. I've been traveling a lot. I've been blessed. I get to do stuff like this. So I've been out of town, been vacation. But my son, one son plays football, the other's playing tennis. And then this 14-year-old also loves car shows now. And so I'm a guy left to my own devices. I am lazy. I procrastinate. I want to sit on my butt and I want to watch Netflix. I want to watch some show. I want to be left alone. I want to put a record on the vinyl player. I want to read a book. I don't want to have a football game, a tennis match, a car show, and then all the other stuff that the family requires. I know that about myself. Because I know that about myself, I don't act out in it. It's rare because I am trying to embody these principles that the most important work is within the four walls of my home. And I want these two boys and my partner who know me best, and my mom and my stepdad, to respect me the most. I do venture into being the prisoner of what I think you think about me. I still venture in there sometimes, but it's through sponsorship. It's through the conversations. It's through intimate self-disclosure. These are principles, by the way. It's through this understanding that I begin to be able, by God's grace and God's mercy, to let go. And my decision making has been simplified. Ralph did this for me a while back. I always had Pray for guidance, pray for evidence, make a list of pros and cons. Yes, all of that still gets done. But now the decision doesn't matter anymore. The decision is God going to be there when I go that direction? That's all that matters. Am I going to walk hand in hand with the spirit of the universe? And I want to thank this group for having me out this morning. There's one that's looking for everybody on this call, and that one is death. And death is going to find everyone on this call. And so much of what we do in this lifetime, in this program, in our way of life, is preparing for that moment to be clean, in my opinion. And I'm the only one that can do that. That's how we clean up the wreckage of our past. So we're free of the regret. We escape the dark shadows of the past so we can see the breaking dawn all around us. I have a debt to repay God, and I'm the only one that can repay that debt. The greatest gift that God has ever given me is my recovery. And what I do with that recovery is my gift back to my Creator. And I hope God's as pleased with my gift to Him as I am with His gift to me. I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. My name's Tarek.